The security camera footage was crystal clear, 3:47 a.m. A shadowy figure creeping across Marcus Chen's driveway with a baseball bat. Crack, crack, crack. His trash bins exploded into plastic shards under the moonlight. But what the HOA president didn't know was that Marcus had been waiting for this moment for months. And when she turned toward the camera with that smug smile, she had no idea she'd just handed him the evidence that would destroy everything she'd built. Sometimes the hunter becomes the hunted. Marcus Chen stood in his driveway at 6:30 a.m., staring at the carnage scattered across his pristine concrete. Shattered fragments of what had once been his regulation-approved trash bins lay strewn like plastic confetti mixed with coffee grounds and banana peels that now decorated his neighbor's prize-winning rose bushes. Son of a... He caught himself, glancing around the Willowbrook Estates development. Even in his fury, 15 years of suburban living had trained him to maintain appearances. But his hands trembled as he pulled out his phone, scrolling through the security app with practiced efficiency. The footage loaded in high definition. There she was, Sandra Morrison, HOA board president and self-appointed guardian of neighborhood perfection, wielding a Louisville slugger like some deranged suburban Viking. Her platinum blonde hair caught the motion sensor lights as she systematically destroyed his property with the methodical precision of a demolition expert. Crack. The recycling bin split down the middle. Crack. The compost container exploded into jagged pieces. Crack. The regular trash bin collapsed like a house of cards, but it was what happened next that made Marcus's blood run cold. Sandra turned directly toward his security camera, her face illuminated in the LED glow, and smiled. Not a sheepish, caught-in-the-act grimace, but a deliberate, calculated smile that said, "I know exactly what I'm doing, and there's nothing you can do about it." She even had the audacity to wave, "Marcus!" The voice of his wife, Jenny, drifted from the front door. What happened out there? He couldn't find words. 3 years. 3 years of escalating warfare with the Willowbrook Estates HOA, and it had finally come to this, outright destruction of his property in the dead of night. It had started innocently enough, a citation for parking his work van in his own driveway overnight. Commercial vehicles prohibited in residential driveways per Section 4.7 of the Community Guidelines, the violation notice had read, printed on official HOA letterhead with Sandra's flourishing signature at the bottom. Marcus had tried reasoning with her. He was a licensed contractor, had been for 12 years, and the van was his livelihood. Where else was he supposed to park it? "That's not the HOA's concern," Sandra had replied during that first disastrous board meeting, her manicured fingers drumming against the conference table in the community center. "Rules are rules, Mr. Chen. If we make exceptions for one resident, where does it end?" The fine had been $50. Reasonable, he'd thought. He paid it and started parking the van 3 blocks away at a 24-hour gas station, walking the distance every morning and evening like some kind of suburban exile. But Sandra Morrison wasn't finished with him. The next violation came 2 weeks later. His trash bins were positioned 6.2 feet from the curb instead of the required maximum of 6 feet. Another $50 fine. Then his mailbox was deemed inconsistent with neighborhood aesthetic standards because he'd chosen forest green instead of the approved hunter green. $100 fine, plus the cost of repainting. His front lawn was cited for having grass that exceeded 3.1 inches in height. The sprinkler system timer was apparently creating water runoff that violated community drainage protocols. His outdoor Christmas lights remained up until January 3rd instead of being removed by New Year's Day. Each violation came with Sandra's signature and an increasingly smug tone in the accompanying letters. Marcus had done the math. In 18 months, he'd paid over $800 in HOA fines, more than some people's monthly rent. "This is harassment," he'd told Jenny one evening, waving the latest citation. This time, Sandra had fined. Him for storing his garden hose in a non-regulation hose reel that was apparently visible from the street. Maybe we should just sell, Jenny had suggested quietly. She was 7 months pregnant with their first child, her hand resting protectively on her rounded belly. Find somewhere without an HOA. But Marcus couldn't let it go. His grandfather had taught him never to back down from bullies, and Sandra Morrison was the worst kind, one with a clipboard and manufactured authority. The breaking point had come 3 months ago during the annual HOA meeting. Marcus had finally gathered enough evidence and resident support to challenge Sandra's reign of terror. He'd prepared a presentation documenting her selective enforcement, showing how families like the Johnsons, who happened to be Sandra's bridge club partners, never received violations despite having dead grass and peeling paint. He'd printed charts, gathered testimonials from other residents, even consulted with a lawyer about the legal definition of harassment. This was his moment to expose Sandra's petty tyranny to the entire community. But when he arrived at the community center that evening, he found the doors locked. A hastily printed sign announced that the meeting had been rescheduled due to facility maintenance issues. Convenient, he'd muttered, but Jenny had tugged his arm. Let it go, Marcus. Please, for the baby's sake. He'd tried. God knows he'd tried. But Sandra had interpreted his silence as surrender, and the violations had increased in both frequency and creativity. She cited him for having unauthorized decorative elements when he put up a small American flag. His doormat was apparently the wrong shade of brown. Even his choice of flowers, cheerful yellow marigolds, violated some obscure guideline about maintaining visual harmony with adjacent properties. And now this. Destruction of property in the middle of the night, captured in glorious 4K resolution on his security system. Marcus looked up as his neighbor, Dave Patterson, emerged from his house in a bathrobe, coffee mug in hand. Jesus, Marcus. What happened here? Take a wild guess. Dave surveyed the wreckage, shaking his head. Sandra's really lost it this time. You've got her on camera, right? Oh, I've got her. Marcus held up his phone, replaying the footage. Question is, what do I do with it? Call the cops, obviously. This is destruction of property. She could be arrested. Marcus had considered that. But Sandra Morrison wasn't just any neighbor. She was connected. Her husband worked for the city planning department, her brother was a county supervisor, and she'd been on the HOA board for 8 years. A simple police report might disappear into bureaucratic limbo, especially if Sandra claimed it was some kind of HOA enforcement action. No, Marcus needed something bigger, something that would expose her for what she really was and ensure she could never terrorize another resident again. I'm not calling the cops, he said finally. Dave nearly choked on his coffee. Are you insane? She destroyed your property. I'm going to do something better. Marcus pocketed his phone, already formulating a plan that would make Sandra Morrison wish she'd never heard his name. I'm going to let her think she won. 3 hours later, Marcus was at Home Depot, purchasing new trash bins and a small mountain of additional security equipment. Not just cameras this time, but motion sensors, infrared illuminators, and a professional-grade recording system that could capture footage admissible in court. If Sandra wanted to escalate their war, he'd give her a battlefield she'd never forget. The cashier, a young woman with purple hair and multiple piercings, scanned his items with growing curiosity. Planning to catch Bigfoot or something? Something like that. Marcus handed her his credit card, already imagining Sandra's face when she realized she'd walked directly into a trap 3 months in the making. He spent the afternoon installing his new surveillance network, strategically positioning cameras to cover every angle of his property. Jenny watched from the kitchen window, occasionally bringing him lemonade and expressing concern about his increasingly obsessive behavior. This isn't healthy, Marcus. You're becoming someone I don't recognize. She "Started this," he replied, adjusting a camera angle, "but I'm going to finish it." That evening, Marcus reviewed the morning's footage again, studying every detail of Sandra's vandalism. She'd been thorough, methodical, and completely unaware that she was creating evidence for her own destruction. But what struck him most was her confidence, the casual way she'd smiled at his camera as if she were untouchable. She was about to learn otherwise. At 11:47 p.m., Marcus received a notification on his phone. Motion detected on his property. He switched to the live feed and watched as Sandra Morrison crept across his yard again, this time carrying what appeared to be a bag of dog waste. She was coming back for round 2. Marcus grabbed his shoes and jacket, moving quietly toward his front door. This time, he wouldn't just watch from the safety of his bedroom. This time, he'd catch her in the act with multiple camera angles, audio recording, and enough evidence to bury her so deep that she'd never surface again. But as he reached for the door handle, his phone buzzed with an incoming text from an unknown number. "Stop watching me, or next time it won't just be your trash bins. Some battles aren't worth fighting, Marcus. Think about your family." His blood turned to ice. Sandra wasn't just escalating their... Marcus stared at the threatening text message until the words burned into his retinas. His hands shook as he screenshotted the evidence, his contractor's mind already cataloging every detail that could be used in court. But beneath his methodical planning, rage simmered like molten steel. "Marcus?" Jenny's voice drifted from upstairs, thick with sleep. "Everything okay?" "Fine, honey. Just checking something." The lie came easily, but it tasted like ash. He couldn't tell his pregnant wife that their HOA president was now threatening their family. Jenny's blood pressure had already spiked twice this month. The stress of Sandra's harassment campaign was taking its toll. Through the window, he watched Sandra retreat to her perfectly manicured fortress 3 houses down. Her Tudor-style home dominated the corner lot like a suburban palace, complete with professional landscaping, imported stone walkways, and a circular driveway that violated at least 4 HOA guidelines that she'd written herself. The hypocrisy made him sick. Marcus pulled up his security app and began downloading every piece of footage from the past 6 months. If Sandra wanted to play psychological warfare, she'd picked the wrong opponent. He'd spent 12 years building a construction business from nothing, dealing with corrupt inspectors, nightmare clients, and cutthroat competitors. A middle-aged woman with a clipboard didn't scare him, but threatening his family did change the rules. At 6:30 a.m. sharp, Marcus called the police non-emergency line. "Millbrook Police Department Officer Rodriguez speaking. I need to report property destruction and criminal threats." Marcus kept his voice steady, professional. "I have video evidence and documentation going back several months. Can you come in to file a report this morning? I'll be there in an hour." The Millbrook Police Station occupied a modern brick building that tried too hard to look welcoming. Marcus arrived with a leather portfolio containing printed screenshots, USB drives with video evidence, and a timeline of Sandra's escalating harassment that read like a stalker's playbook. Officer Rodriguez was younger than expected, maybe early 30s, with sharp eyes that missed nothing as Marcus laid out his case. "So this is your HOA president?" Rodriguez studied the footage of Sandra's baseball bat rampage. "She's not exactly subtle, is she?" Subtlety isn't her strong suit. "But she's been careful to stay within legal gray areas until now." Marcus opened his timeline document. "Look at this pattern. Every violation notice she's sent me has been technically within HOA authority, even if it was selective enforcement. But this," he pointed to the threatening text, "this crosses the line into criminal behavior." Rodriguez made notes as they reviewed the evidence. "The property destruction is definitely criminal mischief, probably a misdemeanor given the dollar amount. The threats could be harassment, maybe intimidation if we can prove she intended to cause fear." "What about the selective enforcement? Other residents have identical violations that she ignores." "That's civil, Not criminal. You'd have to sue the HOA. Rodriguez leaned back in his chair. But I'll tell you what. I'll pay Ms. Morrison a visit this morning. Sometimes a police officer asking questions is enough to cool down these neighborhood disputes. Marcus wanted more, but he recognized a reasonable offer when he heard one. I appreciate that, officer. But you should know. She's connected. Her husband works for city planning. Her brother's a county supervisor. She's used to getting her way. Rodriguez's expression hardened slightly. I don't care if her brother's the governor. Nobody gets to threaten families and destroy property in my jurisdiction. An hour later, Marcus was installing his replacement trash bins when he heard raised voices from Sandra's driveway. Through his bedroom window, he watched Officer Rodriguez speaking with Sandra on her front porch. Even from a distance, her body, language screamed indignation, hands on hips, finger wagging, the whole imperious routine that had terrorized Willowbrook residents for years. But Rodriguez didn't seem impressed. The conversation lasted 15 minutes, with the officer taking notes while Sandra gestured wildly. When it ended, she slammed her front door hard enough to rattle the decorative glass panels. Marcus's phone rang 30 minutes later. Mr. Chen, Officer Rodriguez, I had an interesting conversation with your neighbor. How'd that go? She denied everything, of course, claims the video must be fabricated, says you've been harassing her for months. Real victim complex going on there. Rodriguez paused. But here's the thing. When I mentioned the threatening text message, she got real quiet real fast. Almost like she forgot that texts leave digital footprints. So what happens now? I'm filing a formal report and forwarding it to detectives. They'll probably want to interview both of you. In the meantime, I strongly advise Ms. Morrison to have no further contact with you or your property. Another pause. She didn't seem happy about that suggestion. After ending the call, Marcus felt a grim satisfaction. The first move had been played, and Sandra was already on the defensive. But he knew her well enough by now to recognize that she wouldn't retreat quietly. He was right. That afternoon, Marcus returned from a job site to find an official-looking document taped to his front door. The Willowbrook Estates HOA letterhead was accompanied by an emergency notice that made his stomach drop. Emergency board meeting, resident violation hearing date. Tomorrow, 7 p.m. Subject, multiple and ongoing community violations. Marcus. Chen, 47 Maple Drive. Matter, consideration of maximum penalty assessment and possible legal action. The document listed 17 alleged violations, ranging from the absurd, intimidating behavior toward board members to the fabricated, unauthorized. Modifications to property drainage. Each carried fines ranging from $100 to $500, totaling over $3,000 in penalties. At the bottom, Sandra's signature flourished like a declaration of war. Jenny found him standing in the kitchen, gripping the notice with white knuckles. What is it? Now? She waddled over, one hand supporting her lower back. At 8 months pregnant, even simple movements required effort. Marcus tried to hide the document, but Jenny was faster despite her condition. Her face went pale as she read. $3,000? Marcus, we don't have $3,000 for HOA fines. The baby's coming next month and we're still paying off the medical bills from my complications. It's intimidation tactics. She knows I called the police, so she's trying to bury me in legal expenses. Marcus pulled out his phone. But two can play that game. What are you doing? Calling every resident who's ever complained about Sandra Morrison? If she wants a board meeting, I'll give her one she'll never forget. The next 24 hours blurred together in a frenzy of phone calls, document preparation, and strategic planning. Marcus discovered that Sandra's reign of terror had created more enemies than allies. Mrs. Patterson from Elm Street had been fined for having the wrong shade of shutters. The Johnsons, ironically, Sandra's former bridge partners, had received citations after missing a single HOA meeting. Even the Kowalskis, an elderly Polish couple who barely spoke English, had been assessed penalties for cultural decorations that were actually just their grandchildren's sidewalk chalk art. By 6:45 p.m., 23 residents had gathered in the Willowbrook Community Center more than had attended an HOA meeting in years. The tension was palpable as Sandra took her position at the head table, flanked by the other two board members, Tom Bradley, a meek accountant who rarely spoke, and Lisa Wu, a real estate agent who'd been Sandra's lapdog for 3 years. Sandra's confidence seemed shaken by the turnout, but she maintained her authoritative facade. This emergency meeting has been called to address the ongoing violations and disruptive behavior of resident Marcus Chen. Her voice carried across the room with practiced authority. Mr. Chen has repeatedly violated community guidelines and has now escalated to harassment of board members. Marcus stood slowly. He'd learned from his grandfather that in a room full of bullies, the person who stayed calm usually won. Before we discuss my alleged violations, I'd like to address the elephant in the room. He pulled out his tablet, connecting it to the community center's projection system. 3 nights ago, our HOA president committed criminal destruction of property on my land. The security footage filled the wall-mounted screen in high definition. Gasps echoed through the room as Sandra's baseball bat rampage played in real time. When the video reached the moment where she smiled and waved at the camera, the audience erupted in shocked murmurs. "That video is fabricated!" Sandra shot to her feet, her composed mask slipping completely. "This man has been stalking me for months, and now he's resorting to digital manipulation to—" "The metadata is available for independent verification," Marcus interrupted calmly, "along with the threatening text message you sent afterward." He displayed the screenshot of Sandra's threat, and the room's energy shifted palpably. These weren't abstract HOA violations anymore. This was criminal behavior from their elected representative. Mrs. Patterson raised her hand. "Sandra, is this true? Did you destroy Marcus's property?" Sandra looked around the room, seeing hostility where she'd once commanded respect. "This is a witch hunt. Marcus Chen has violated dozens of community standards, and instead of taking responsibility, he's trying to distract everyone with evidence of your criminal behavior?" The voice came from the back of the room. "Oh!" Jenny Chen commanded the room's attention with the quiet authority that only expectant mothers possess. Her pregnancy had been difficult. Morning sickness that lasted 6 months, 2 hospitalizations for high blood pressure, and the constant stress of Sandra's harassment campaign that their doctor had warned could trigger premature labor. But tonight, Jenny looked like a warrior. "I apologize for interrupting," she said, addressing the crowd while keeping her eyes locked on Sandra. "But I've been listening to this meeting from the hallway, and I think you all deserve to know some facts about your HOA president that she's been hiding." Sandra's face cycled through confusion, anger, and something approaching panic. "Mrs. Chen, you have no standing to speak at this emergency meeting. The agenda is bullshit." Jenny's voice cut through Sandra's protests like a blade. The room collectively gasped. Sweet, quiet Jenny Chen had never been heard to curse even mildly. "And so is everything else you've been feeding this community for the past 8 years. Marcus stared at his wife in amazement. He'd known she was angry about Sandra's harassment, but Jenny had always advocated for the peaceful approach. Ignore the violations, pay the fines, keep the peace. What had changed? Jenny pulled out her phone and connected it to the projection system, replacing Marcus's security footage with a spreadsheet that made the audience lean forward in their seats. "This morning, I got tired of being a victim. So I did what any rational person does when dealing with corruption. I followed the money." The spreadsheet filled the wall, showing HOA financial records going back 3 years. "Sandra, would you like to explain to everyone where their community fees have been going?" The color drained from Sandra's face so completely that Lisa Wu reached out to steady her. "I don't know what you think you found," Sandra stammered, But HOA financial records are confidential and are public information for any homeowner who requests them, Jenny interrupted smoothly. Which I did, officially, this morning. She clicked to the next slide, showing a series of financial transfers. Interesting how many payments have gone to Morrison Landscaping Services, Morrison Property Management, and Morrison Home Maintenance. All companies owned by your family members, all awarded contracts without competitive bidding. The room erupted in angry murmurs. Mrs. Patterson stood up, pointing at the screen. That's my community fee money going to your personal contractors? Community maintenance requires professional services, Sandra replied defensively, but her voice lacked its usual conviction. All work was performed according to inflated quotes that were sometimes triple the market rate, Jenny continued relentlessly. She clicked again, revealing a comparison chart. Marcus and I got estimates from 5 local companies for the same services you've been buying from your relatives. On average, the Morrison companies charged 280% more than comparable contractors. Marcus felt a surge of pride watching his wife systematically dismantle Sandra's empire. Jenny worked as a forensic accountant for a mid-sized firm downtown. Financial fraud was literally her specialty. How had he forgotten that his wife was perfectly equipped for this kind of warfare? Over the past 3 years, Jenny continued, Sandra Morrison has funneled over $87,000 in community fees to companies owned by her immediate family members. Money that should have gone to actual community improvements, emergency reserves, and legitimate maintenance. The audience was no longer murmuring, they were shouting. Tom Bradley, the meek accountant who served as treasurer, looked like he might vomit. Lisa Wu was frantically scrolling through her own phone, probably checking her own financial exposure, but Sandra Morrison had survived too many battles to surrender without a fight. "This is slander," she shrieked, her composure completely shattered. "My family's companies provide quality services at competitive rates, and any implication otherwise is grounds for criminal fraud charges," Officer Rodriguez interjected quietly. His radio crackled, and he stepped aside to take a call while the room dissolved into chaos. Marcus watched Sandra scan the crowd, searching for allies among the residents she'd terrorized for years. Finding none, she turned her fury on the person she perceived as her greatest threat. "You want to talk about criminal behavior?" Sandra pointed a shaking finger at Jenny. "Your husband has been stalking me for months, installing cameras pointed at my property, following me around the neighborhood, making threatening phone calls." "Actually," Jenny said calmly, "let's talk about stalking." She clicked to another slide, this one showing a detailed timeline. Marcus installed security cameras after the 15th HOA violation notice in 18 months. Every camera is positioned to monitor his own property, not yours. As for following you around, she smiled coldly. "Sandra, you've been coming to his property to commit vandalism. That's not stalking, that's evidence collection." The crowd laughed, and Sandra's face flushed crimson with humiliation and rage. But Jenny wasn't finished. "However, if we want to discuss inappropriate surveillance, I found something interesting in the HOA's expense records." Another click. "Monthly payments to Watchdog Security Services for community monitoring systems. Care to explain what those are, Sandra?" Sandra's mouth opened and closed silently, like a fish drowning in air. Mrs. Patterson squinted at the screen. "Community monitoring? We don't have any community security cameras." "No," Jenny agreed. "You don't. But someone has been using HOA funds to monitor individual residents' properties without their knowledge or consent, watching their daily routines, documenting their activities, building files on anyone who might challenge the board's authority." The room fell silent as the implications sank in. Marcus felt his own stomach clench with the realization that Sandra's harassment campaign had been even more invasive than he'd imagined. "That's illegal surveillance," someone called out from the back. "Stalking," added another voice. Violation of privacy. Sandra stood in the center of the growing storm, her 8-year reign crumbling around her in real time. But cornered animals are always most dangerous, and Sandra Morrison had one final card to play. You want to destroy me? Her voice dropped to a whisper that somehow carried across the entire room. Fine, but I'm taking this whole community down, with me. She reached into her briefcase and pulled out a thick manila folder. See? The beautiful thing about being HOA president for 8 years is that you learn everyone's dirty little secrets. She opened the folder with theatrical slowness, revealing photographs and documents that made several audience members shift uncomfortably in their seats. Tom Bradley, our treasurer, he's been skimming cash from the petty cash fund for 2 years to pay for his online gambling addiction. Sandra's smile was predatory now, feeding on the fear in people's faces. Lisa Wu has been using her real estate license to steer potential buyers away from houses owned by residents she doesn't like, manipulating property values for personal gain. Tom Bradley bolted from the room, his face gray with panic. Lisa Wu followed seconds later, leaving Sandra alone at the head table, but she wasn't done. Mrs. Patterson, should we discuss your husband's little side business growing marijuana in your basement? Or maybe we should talk about the Kowalskis' immigration status. Turns out those documents they provided when they bought their house were... She made a theatrical shrugging gesture. The room was hemorrhaging residents now, people fleeing before Sandra could expose their secrets to the entire community. Marcus realized with growing horror that Sandra had spent years building files on everyone, collecting ammunition for exactly this kind of scorched earth scenario. You're sick, Jenny said quietly, but her voice carried clearly in the emptying room. You've been spying on families, collecting their private information, using it to control them through fear. I've been protecting this community. Sandra screamed, her mask of civility finally shattered completely. Do you have any idea what this neighborhood was like before I took control? Property values were stagnant, maintenance was sporadic, and everyone did whatever they wanted. I created order, I created value, I made Willowbrook Estates the most desirable development in the county. By terrorizing families and stealing community funds, Marcus said quietly. Sandra whirled on him with pure hatred in her eyes. You started this war, Marcus Chen. You could have just followed the rules, paid your fines, and lived peacefully like everyone else. But you had to be special. You had to be the hero. Her laugh was bitter and unhinged. Well, congratulations. You won. But let's see how heroic you feel when Child Protective Services gets an anonymous tip about unsafe living conditions at 47 Maple Drive. The threat hit Marcus like a physical blow. Child Protective Services could remove their baby, split up their family, destroy their lives with nothing more than an anonymous complaint and bureaucratic procedure. You wouldn't, Jenny breathed. Try me. Sandra's smile was pure malice. I know people in every department, every agency, every office that matters in this county. You think calling one small-town police officer is going to protect you from what I can unleash? She leaned forward, her voice dropping to a venomous whisper. I will burn your entire world to the ground before I let you destroy mine. Officer Rodriguez finished his radio call and approached the head table, his expression grim. The arrest of Sandra Morrison should have brought peace to Willowbrook Estates. Instead, it unleashed chaos that made her reign of terror look like amateur hour. Marcus discovered this at 3:17 a.m. when his phone exploded with emergency notifications. Every security camera on his property had triggered simultaneously, but the feeds showed nothing but static. His state-of-the-art surveillance system, the digital fortress he'd built to protect his family, had been professionally disabled. Marcus? Jenny's voice was tight with fear from the bedroom doorway. There's someone in our backyard. He grabbed the baseball bat he'd started keeping beside the bed and moved toward the window. The motion sensor lights should have illuminated the entire yard, but everything was dark. Even the street lights seemed dimmer. as if someone had systematically sabotaged the lighting throughout their section of the neighborhood. "Call 911, he whispered, but Jenny was already dialing. Through the darkness, Marcus could make out shadowy figures moving with military precision around his property. Not random vandals or teenage pranksters, these were professionals. They moved in coordinated patterns, avoiding sight lines from neighboring houses, using the landscape features as cover. "Awen, what's your emergency?" "This is Jennifer Chen at 47 Maple Drive in Willowbrook Estates. There are intruders on our property. Multiple suspects, possibly armed." The line went dead. Marcus checked his phone. No signal. Jenny's showed the same. 5 bars of nothing, as if someone had deployed a signal jammer. "The landline," Jenny whispered. But Marcus was already moving toward the kitchen. He lifted the receiver to dead silence. The phone lines had been cut. They were completely isolated. A soft scraping sound came from the front door. Someone was picking the lock with professional expertise. Marcus positioned himself in the hallway, bat raised, while Jenny grabbed the emergency bag they'd prepared after Sandra's threats escalated. But the attack didn't come from the front door. Instead, their bedroom window exploded inward in a shower of glass and ceramic fragments. Not a brick or baseball. Someone had thrown what looked like a small electronic device that was now emitting a high-pitched whining sound. "Gas!" Marcus shouted, recognizing the deployment method even if he couldn't identify the specific chemical. He grabbed Jenny's hand and pulled her toward the garage, their only remaining exit route. But the garage door wouldn't open. The electronic controls had been disabled, and the manual release had been cut. They were trapped in their own home with an unknown chemical agent filling the air and professional intruders surrounding the property. Jenny's breathing became labored, and Marcus realized with growing panic that whatever they'd deployed was affecting her pregnancy. At 36 weeks, any respiratory distress could trigger premature labor, or worse. "The basement," he said, leading her toward the stairs. The basement had a separate ventilation system and a walkout door that faced the woods behind their property. If they could reach it, the house lights died completely, plunging them into absolute darkness. Marcus used his phone's flashlight to navigate, but the battery was draining impossibly fast. Another electronic attack. They had maybe 10 minutes of light left, and Jenny was struggling to keep up. "I can't," she gasped, stopping halfway down the basement stairs. "Something's wrong. The baby." Marcus felt wetness on his hand. In the phone's dying light, he saw blood. Jenny was hemorrhaging. The realization hit him like a sledgehammer. This wasn't just harassment or intimidation. Someone was trying to kill his wife and unborn child, making it look like a home invasion, gone wrong, or a tragic accident caused by their recent stress. Sandra Morrison was still in jail, but her connections ran deep enough to orchestrate this attack from behind bars. Marcus helped Jenny to the basement floor and tried to assess her condition in the fading light. The bleeding wasn't catastrophic yet, but without immediate medical attention, both she and the baby could die within hours. He had to get them out of the house. The basement's walkout door had been their planned escape route, but Marcus now realized it was probably monitored. Whoever was orchestrating this attack had studied their property extensively, anticipated their movements, planned for their desperation, but they'd made one crucial mistake. Marcus's construction business had required him to memorize the utility layouts for the entire Willowbrook development. Every house, every connection, every maintenance tunnel that connected properties to the main utility grid, including the storm drainage system that ran directly beneath their basement. "Jenny, I need you to stay conscious for me. Can you do that?" She nodded weakly, her face pale but determined. Marcus found his toolbox in the darkness and selected a heavy crowbar. The basement floor was concrete, but underneath ran a network of drainage pipes large enough for a person to crawl through. He'd helped install them 12 years ago when the development was built. 20 minutes of desperate work opened a hole large enough for them to escape. The drainage tunnel was cramped, dark, and filled with stagnant water, but it would take them 2 blocks away to the main utility access point near Elm Street. "I can't fit," Jenny whispered, looking at the narrow opening. Her pregnancy made the crawl space impossible to navigate. Marcus felt despair crushing down on him. They were out of options, out of time, and Jenny was losing blood with every passing minute. That's when he heard the sirens. Not just 1 or 2 patrol cars, but what sounded like half the Millbrook Police Department converging on Willowbrook Estates. The electronic jamming that had cut their communications must have also interfered with the attackers' ability to monitor police frequencies. "Millbrook Police! Come out with your hands visible!" The voice boomed through a bullhorn, followed by the sound of multiple vehicles surrounding their property. Flashlight beams began sweeping through their windows, and Marcus heard boots on their front porch. The intruders were retreating, melting away into the darkness as quickly as they'd appeared. Professional soldiers knew when to abort a mission, and a full police response meant their window of opportunity had closed. Marcus helped Jenny up the basement stairs, and they emerged into their destroyed home to find Officer Rodriguez and 3 other officers clearing the rooms with weapons drawn. "Mr. Chen, is your wife injured? She needs an ambulance. Now!" The next 4 hours blurred together in a nightmare of emergency rooms, police interviews, and doctors who spoke in hushed tones about complications and high-risk situations. Jenny stabilized, but barely. The chemical agent had been some kind of industrial solvent designed to cause respiratory distress and trigger premature labor. Someone had specifically targeted a pregnant woman with a weapon designed to kill both mother and child. At dawn, Detective Sarah Martinez sat across from Marcus in the hospital waiting room, her expression grim as she reviewed the night's events. "The good news is that your wife and baby are stable. The bad news is that whoever did this was professional-level talent. Military or intelligence background, expensive equipment, detailed surveillance of your routines." She flipped through her notes. "They disabled your security system, cut your communications, and deployed a chemical agent that doesn't show up on standard toxicology screens. This was Sandra Morrison." Sandra Morrison is sitting in county lockup with a dozen witnesses to confirm she never left her cell. Martinez leaned forward. "But you're right about one thing. This level of sophistication doesn't come cheap. Someone with serious money and connections orchestrated this attack." Marcus felt exhaustion crushing down on him. "So what now? We just wait for them to try again? Now we play their game better than they do." Martinez smiled grimly. "See, whoever hired these professionals made a crucial mistake. They assumed small-town cops wouldn't recognize military-grade tactics or know how to respond to electronic warfare." She pulled out her phone and showed Marcus a series of photographs, tire tracks, footprints, discarded equipment that the attackers had left behind in their hasty retreat. "My partner served 2 tours in Afghanistan before joining the force. He recognized the deployment pattern, the equipment signatures, even the specific type of gas they used. There are maybe 6 companies in the country that train personnel in these techniques, and we're going to visit every single one until we find out who Sandra Morrison hired to kill your family. And in the meantime, you're going to disappear." Martinez explained the witness protection protocol that the state police used for high-profile cases, safe houses, new identities, round-the-clock security, until the threat was neutralized. It meant abandoning their home, their business, their entire life in Willowbrook Estates. But it also meant staying alive long enough to see their child born. As Marcus signed the paperwork that would erase their old identities, his phone buzzed. With a text from an unknown number. "Running won't save you. I have friends in places you can't imagine. Your baby will never be safe as long as I'm breathing." "This is just the beginning." Detective Martinez read the message and added it to her evidence file. "We'll trace this, but I'm guessing it's another burner phone, probably purchased with cash, months ago." Marcus stared at the threatening words until they blurred together. Sandra Morrison had declared total war on his family, using resources and connections that turned their suburban neighborhood into a battlefield. But as he watched, Jenny sleeping, Marcus Chen had spent 3 weeks in witness protection, learning to be someone else. Michael Collins, construction supervisor from Cedar Falls, married to Jessica Collins, expecting their first child. New social security numbers, fabricated work, histories, and a safe house 40 miles from Willowbrook Estates that felt like a suburban prison. But prison cells have walls, and walls can be escaped. On a gray Tuesday morning, while Detective Martinez met with federal prosecutors about Sandra Morrison's expanding criminal enterprise, Marcus slipped away from his protective custody. He'd convinced Jenny that he was going for a supervised walk around the block with Officer Henderson. Instead, he climbed into the back of a landscaping truck driven by Dave Patterson, his former neighbor who'd been secretly coordinating the resistance movement that was building in Willowbrook Estates. "You're insane," Dave said as they drove toward town. "Martinez will have your head if she finds out you broke protocol." "Martinez is trying to build a legal case that could take months or years. I don't have that kind of time." Marcus adjusted the baseball cap that partially concealed his face. "Jenny's due in 3 weeks, and every day we stay hidden is another day Sandra's network gets stronger." Dave navigated through back roads, avoiding the main highways where police might spot them. "What exactly do you think you can accomplish that a dozen detectives and federal agents can't?" Marcus smiled grimly. "I'm going to do what law enforcement can't. I'm going to fight dirty." Their first stop was a coffee shop in downtown Millbrook, where Tom Bradley, the former HOA treasurer, sat hunched over a laptop like a broken man. His online gambling addiction had cost him his job, his marriage, and his reputation, but it had also made him desperate enough to cooperate with anyone offering revenge against Sandra Morrison. "She destroyed my life," Tom said without looking, up from his screen. 23 years of marriage gone. My kids won't return my calls, all because I borrowed some petty cash that I was planning to pay back anyway." "What do you have for me?" Marcus asked. Tom turned his laptop around, revealing financial records that made Marcus's eyes widen. Sandra's been running multiple embezzlement schemes, not just the family contracting business. She's been skimming from the community emergency fund, overcharging for legal services, even selling HOA equipment and pocketing the proceeds. He clicked through spreadsheets that documented systematic theft going back 8 years. Conservative estimate? She's stolen over $300,000 from Willowbrook residents. "Why didn't you report this before?" "Because she had dirt on everyone. My gambling, Lisa's real estate fraud, Mrs. Patterson's husband's grow operation. She made us all complicit in minor crimes so we wouldn't dare expose her major ones." Tom's laugh was bitter. Mutually assured destruction, suburban style. Marcus studied the financial records, his contractor's mind calculating not just the monetary theft, but the human cost. Delayed maintenance had led to flooding in the Kowalskis' basement. Deferred infrastructure improvements had caused sinkholes that damaged 3 properties. Sandra hadn't just stolen money, she'd stolen the community's safety and security. "I need you to send this to someone," Marcus said, writing down an email address. "Detective Martinez, State Attorney General's office, and the FBI's Financial Crimes Division. All at the same time, from multiple accounts, so it can't be buried or lost in bureaucracy." "What about you? Where will you be?" "Paying a visit to our former HOA president." The Millbrook County Jail was a modern facility that tried to balance security with humane treatment. Visitors sat across from inmates in a sterile room, monitored by cameras and corrections officers who'd heard every sob story and threat imaginable. Sandra Morrison looked smaller in her orange jumpsuit, her perfectly styled hair replaced by gray, roots and prison regulation ponytail. But her eyes still burned with the unhinged fury that had driven her to orchestrate an attempted murder. "I wondered when you'd come," she said into the phone that connected them through the reinforced glass. How's your wife, Marcus? Still bleeding? She's alive. Your hired killers failed. Sandra's smile was pure poison. That was just a warning, a demonstration of what I can reach from inside this cage. She leaned forward, her voice dropping to a whisper. You have no idea how deep my connections go. Judges, prosecutors, police, chiefs. I've been building relationships for 20 years while you were playing with your little construction toys. Marcus had expected this psychological warfare, but hearing the naked malice in Sandra's voice still chilled him. Those connections work both ways. People you thought were loyal have been talking to federal investigators. Tom Bradley? Sandra laughed. That pathetic gambling addict? Who's going to believe a word he says? The FBI, apparently, along with Lisa Wu, the Kowalskis, and about 15 other residents who've been documenting your crimes for months. Marcus pulled out a thick envelope and pressed it against the glass. Financial records, witness statements, digital evidence of your embezzlement schemes. Your criminal enterprise is falling apart, Sandra. For the first time, uncertainty flickered across Sandra's face. You're bluffing. Am I? Marcus opened the envelope and showed her photocopies of bank records, forged invoices, and email communications between Sandra and her family's contracting businesses. The FBI's Financial Crimes Division is very interested in patterns of municipal corruption, especially when it involves threats against pregnant women. Sandra's composure cracked slightly. None of that is admissible without proper warrants, and who said anything about court? Marcus smiled coldly. I'm not here as a witness or victim, Sandra. I'm here as a businessman making you an offer. What kind of offer? The kind that keeps your family out of federal prison. Marcus leaned back in his chair, projecting calm confidence he didn't entirely feel. See? Your husband's city planning job? Turns out he approved several developments that violated environmental regulations, probably at your request. Your brother's county supervisor position? He's been steering municipal contracts toward companies that pay kickbacks to your political network. Your son's architectural firm? Half their building permits were rubber-stamped through your connections. Sandra's face went white. You can't prove any of that. I don't have to prove it. I just have to make sure the right investigators start looking in the right places. Marcus tapped the glass separating them. Federal corruption charges carry 10 to 20-year sentences, Sandra. Your whole family could disappear into the prison system for the next 2 decades. What do you want? I want you to call off your dogs, permanently. I want written confessions for every crime you've committed against Willowbrook residents, and I want full restitution for every dollar you've stolen from our community. Marcus's voice hardened. Most importantly, I want a guarantee that my family will never be threatened again. Sandra stared at him for a long moment, her mind clearly calculating odds and options. And if I refuse? Then I release everything to the media, the FBI, and the state attorney general simultaneously. Your family's criminal empire becomes front-page news. Your political connections scatter like roaches when the lights come on. And you spend the rest of your life watching your loved ones disappear into federal lockup one by one. The silence stretched between them, broken only by the hum of ventilation systems and distant conversations from other visitor booths. Marcus could see Sandra's mask of control finally slipping completely as she realized that her reign of terror had created an enemy capable of destroying everything she'd built. You bastard, she whispered. You sanctimonious, self-righteous bastard. You think you're the hero of this story? I think I'm a father protecting his family from a sociopath who tried to murder my pregnant wife. Marcus stood to leave. You have 24 hours to decide, Sandra. After that, the files go public and your family starts learning what it feels like to be victims instead of predators. As Marcus walked away, Sandra's voice followed him through the prison's corridors. This isn't over. You hear me? I'll find a way to make you pay for this. You and your wife and your bastard child. But her threats sounded hollow now. The desperate ravings of a dethroned tyrant who'd finally met someone capable of playing her game better than she ever could. Marcus emerged from the jail into gray afternoon sunlight, already planning his next moves. Sandra Morrison's criminal empire was crumbling, but wounded predators were always most dangerous in their final moments. He had 24 hours to prepare for whatever desperate counterstrike she might attempt, and a pregnant wife whose safety depended on his ability to anticipate every possible threat. The war for Willowbrook Estates was entering its final phase, and Marcus Chen intended to win it decisively, even if it meant destroying himself in the process. But as he climbed into Dave Patterson's truck for the ride back to witness protection, Marcus's phone buzzed with a text that made his blood turn to ice. "Your wife just went into labor. She's asking for you. Come alone or watch your family die. A friend." The trap had been set, and Marcus realized with crystal clarity that Sandra Morrison had been playing a deeper game than anyone had imagined. Marcus stared at the text message until the words burned into his vision. Jenny wasn't due for 3 weeks. Premature labor could kill both her and the baby, especially if she wasn't receiving proper medical care. But the message's phrasing made his contractor's instincts scream danger. "Come alone or watch your family die." Wasn't medical urgency. It was a hostage situation. "Drive," he told Dave Patterson. "Hospital. Now." "Marcus, this could be, it's a trap. I know it's a trap." Marcus was already dialing Detective Martinez's number. "But if there's even a 1% chance Jenny's actually in labor, I'm not gambling with my family's lives." The call went straight to voicemail. So did his backup number for the witness protection team. Either the communication jamming had started again, or Sandra's network had found ways to isolate him from law enforcement support. Dave's truck ate up the miles toward Millbrook General Hospital, while Marcus tried to think 3 moves ahead like Sandra had taught him to. She was still in jail, but her reach extended far beyond prison walls. The attack on his home had proven that her criminal network included people with military training and expensive equipment. Now she was using his unborn child as bait. "There," Dave pointed toward the hospital's emergency entrance. "Ambulance just pulled in." Marcus saw the paramedics wheeling a pregnant woman through the automatic doors, but the distance and angle made identification impossible. His heart hammered against his ribs as terrible possibilities cascaded through his mind. "Drop me at the main entrance," he said. "Then call Detective Martinez every 5 minutes until you reach her. Tell her Sandra Morrison's network has my wife." "What are you going to do?" "Whatever it takes." Millbrook General's lobby bustled with the controlled chaos of a regional medical center. Marcus approached the information desk, trying to project calm while his world disintegrated around him. "I'm looking for my wife, Jennifer Chen. She may have been brought in for premature labor." The volunteer, an elderly woman with kind eyes, checked her computer screen. "I'm sorry, sir. We don't have any record of that name being admitted today." Marcus felt relief and terror in equal measure. Jenny wasn't in the hospital's system, which meant either she wasn't here or someone was, keeping her admission off the official records. "Try Jessica Collins," he said, using their witness protection identities. "Oh yes, room 314, maternity ward, 3rd floor, but visiting hours don't start until—" Marcus was already moving toward the elevators, his mind racing through tactical options. If this was a trap, they'd expect him to come straight to room 314. If Jenny was actually in labor, any delay could cost lives. The elevator carried him upward through a building that suddenly felt like enemy territory. Every nurse, every doctor, every security guard could be part of Sandra's network. After the professional attack on his home, Marcus knew he was dealing with people who had infinite resources and no moral boundaries. The 3rd floor's maternity ward should have been a place of joy and new beginnings. Instead, it felt like a battlefield where his family's future would be decided. Room 314 was at the end of a long corridor lined with cheerful murals of storks and baby animals. Through the partially open door, Marcus could see a figure lying in the hospital bed, connected to monitors that beeped with reassuring rhythm. But something was wrong. The woman in the bed had Jenny's build and hair color, but her face was turned away from the door. The monitors showed vital signs consistent with active labor, but the room felt too quiet, too controlled, too much like a stage set waiting for its final act. Marcus pulled out his phone and tried calling Jenny's number. From inside room 314, he heard the faint sound of a phone ringing. Someone had set up an elaborate deception using Jenny's phone and a woman who resembled her from a distance. While he stood in this hospital corridor, his real wife could be anywhere, held captive in actual labor or worse. Mr. Chen. A voice behind him made Marcus spin around. A tall man in scrubs approached with the confident stride of someone accustomed to authority. "Dr. Williams, obstetrics. Your wife's been asking for you." "Where is she?" "Room 314, of course." "She's doing well, but we need to discuss some complications with the delivery." Dr. Williams gestured toward the room with practiced medical authority. "If you'll just come with me." Marcus didn't move. Something about the doctor's demeanor felt rehearsed, like an actor playing a role. Real emergency physicians were usually frazzled, rushed, focused on medical details rather than smooth conversation. "What kind of complications?" "Nothing life-threatening, but we may need to perform an emergency cesarean." "Time is critical, Mr. Chen. Your wife needs you to make some important decisions about her care." The urgency was designed to override his caution, push him into the room where whatever trap Sandra had prepared could spring shut. But Marcus had spent 12 years dealing with contractors who used high-pressure tactics to rush clients into bad decisions. "I want to see her first. Alone." Dr. Williams's professional smile flickered slightly. "I'm afraid hospital protocol requires medical supervision during active labor, for the safety of both mother and child." "Then you won't mind if I call Detective Martinez to witness these medical decisions." Marcus pulled out his phone with deliberate slowness. "She's been handling our case, and I know she'd want to be here for—" The fake doctor's hand moved toward his pocket with practiced speed, but Marcus was already diving sideways as the tranquilizer dart embedded itself in the wall where his head had been. The corridor erupted in chaos as 3 more people in medical scrubs emerged from nearby rooms, moving with military precision. That had nothing to do with health care. Marcus rolled behind a medication cart as another dart whispered past his ear, then came up running toward the stairwell. Behind him, he could hear radio chatter in the clipped tones of professional soldiers. "Target is mobile, heading for stairwell C. Seal the exits." Marcus's construction experience had taught him to memorize building layouts instinctively. Millbrook General was built in phases over 30 years, creating a maze of interconnected wings, service corridors, and maintenance areas that most people never noticed. He bypassed the main stairwell and ducked into a utility room, then followed the service corridor that ran parallel to the patient floors. His phone still had no signal. They were jamming communications throughout the building. But he could hear the systematic search pattern of people who'd studied the hospital's layout extensively. Sandra's network hadn't just prepared a trap in room 314. They'd turned the entire hospital into a hunting ground. But where was Jenny? Marcus found his answer in the basement-level maintenance area, where the hospital's security office monitored dozens of camera feeds throughout the building. The door had been left unlocked, and the security guard was conspicuously absent. On one of the monitors, Marcus saw Jenny, the real Jenny, strapped to a gurney in what looked like an ambulance. She was clearly in labor, her face contorted with pain, but no medical personnel were attending to her. The timestamp showed the feed was live, and the GPS coordinates in the corner indicated the ambulance was parked less than 2 miles from the hospital. Marcus grabbed the security guard's radio and tried multiple channels until he found one that wasn't jammed. Any unit, this is an emergency. Pregnant woman in distress, ambulance parked at coordinates." He read off the GPS location while downloading the video file to a USB drive. A voice crackled back. "This is Detective Martinez. Marcus, where the hell are you?" Millbrook General, basement security office. "They have Jenny in an ambulance 2 miles south of here. She's in active labor with no medical support. We're tracking your location. Stay put until—" The radio died as someone cut the main power to the hospital. Emergency lighting kicked in, bathing everything in red that made the basement feel like the heart of hell itself. Marcus heard boots on the stairs. The hunting party had found him. But he'd accomplished what he came for. Law enforcement now knew where Jenny was, and the video evidence would expose Sandra's network even if they killed him in the next few minutes. As the footsteps approached the security office, Marcus made peace with the possibility that he might not live to see his child born. But he'd done everything a father could do. He'd protected his family even when it meant sacrificing himself. The door burst open, and Marcus Chen prepared to make his final stand against the people who'd declared war on his family. Instead, he found himself face-to-face with Detective Martinez and 6 heavily armed FBI agents, their weapons trained on the corridor behind him. "Clear!" Martinez shouted into her radio. "We have the witness. Move on the ambulance location now." As they escorted Marcus toward the stairs, he could hear Sandra Morrison's hired soldiers retreating through the hospital's maze of corridors, their carefully planned operation collapsing as federal agents flooded the building. But the real victory came 20 minutes later, when Marcus held his newborn daughter in the back of a police-escorted ambulance, while Jenny smiled through exhaustion and relief. "What are we going to name her?" Jenny whispered. Marcus looked at the tiny, perfect face of his daughter, born in the middle of a war zone but somehow untouched by the violence that had defined their lives for the past months. "Justice," he said. "Her name is Justice Chen." And, in that moment, surrounded by law enforcement officers who'd risked their lives to